Useless old woman, can't you move any faster? Vanessa's voice echoed through the apartment hallway as I struggled with a heavy laundry basket. Before we continue, first, let me thank you for watching Auntie May 365 Voice. Please subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We might give you a shout out in our next video. Today's special shout out goes to Rose Lowe from Humble, Texas. Thank you for being part of our family. Now let me tell you everything. My back ached from yesterday's gardening on the balcony terrace, but I kept walking toward the small laundry room at the end of the hall. The neighbors across the hall in this high-rise could probably hear her through the thin walls. I felt my cheeks turn red with shame as Mrs. Peterson from next door looked over from her doorway shaking her head. I was carrying towels and sheets that had piled up for days, while Vanessa sat watching television shows all afternoon. My son Jonathan was at work again, missing another scene where his wife treated me like I was invisible. The basket slipped from my tired hands. "Now look what you've done!" Vanessa screamed as clean clothes scattered across the polished wooden floor. She stood up from her chair, pointing at me like I was a child who had broken something precious. "Pick it all up and wash it again. Everything's dirty now because you can't handle simple tasks." I bent down slowly, my knees creaking like old wooden stairs. The clothes weren't really dirty. They had landed on clean hardwood, but arguing would only make things worse. Vanessa loved having an audience for these moments. She called her sister on the phone and started complaining about me while I was still picking up socks and shirts. "You wouldn't believe how difficult it is," she said loudly. "I'm sorry," I whispered, just like I always did. Those two words had become my daily uniform, worn so often they felt meaningless. Vanessa was painting her nails bright red, the same color as the luxury car she wanted Jonathan to buy her. She was only 28, beautiful and confident in ways I remembered being once upon a time. When Jonathan first brought her home 2 years ago, I thought she was wonderful. Smart, funny, full of dreams about their future together. I gave her my grandmother's ring as a welcome gift. Now I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake trusting someone so quickly. "Mom's getting clumsy in her old age," Jonathan said with a nervous laugh when he came home from work. He loosened his tie and avoided looking directly at me. I wanted to tell him I was only 58, not 90. I wanted to remind him that I had raised 3 children alone after his father died, that I had run my own small business for 15 years. But Vanessa had convinced him I was becoming helpless, that my mind was getting fuzzy, that I needed constant watching. She had a gift for making people believe her stories, for twisting truth into whatever shape served her needs best. I walked to the kitchen to start dinner. My slippers made soft sounds on the tile floor of the modern apartment we had chosen together when Jonathan was still in high school. Behind me, Vanessa's voice rose and felt like music as she told Jonathan about her day at the beauty salon. She had that special talent for making ordinary events sound fascinating, for making people hang on every word she spoke. I used to have that ability too back when I was younger, and people listened to what I had to say. Now I felt like a ghost in my own home, present, but not really there. The kitchen had become my hiding place. The only room where Vanessa didn't follow me to criticize every move I made. When they first moved in 18 months ago after losing their downtown apartment, everything changed slowly, like seasons shifting. First, Vanessa rearranged the living room furniture. Then she took over the master bathroom. Gradually, I found myself using the small guest bathroom and sleeping in Jonathan's old bedroom. My own apartment was becoming unfamiliar territory, controlled by someone who treated it like her personal kingdom, while treating me like an unwelcome visitor who had overstayed her welcome. I opened the refrigerator and pulled out ingredients for spaghetti, Jonathan's favorite meal since childhood. My hands shook slightly as I filled the pot with water. I couldn't let them see me cry again. Vanessa always found a way to use my tears against me later. From the living room came the sound of Vanessa's laughter, probably sharing some story about her friends or her job at the cosmetic dental office. She never mentioned the problems they were having with money, or how they couldn't afford rent on their old place, or how my small pension was helping pay for groceries. I arranged the plates on the dining table, making everything look perfect the way my mother had taught me years ago. The table setting was beautiful, like something from a magazine, even though everything underneath was falling apart. Vanessa appeared in the doorway just as I was lighting the candles. Finally, she announced loudly enough for Jonathan to hear from the living room. I was starting to think we'd have to order pizza again. Some people take forever to do simple things. She examined the table like a restaurant critic searching for something to complain about. When Jonathan joined us for dinner, Vanessa looked at her plate and frowned deeply. "This sauce tastes strange," she declared, pushing pasta around with her fork. "Did you forget to add salt? And these noodles are mushy. Honestly, Eleanor, I don't understand how someone can mess up such a basic recipe." I sat there holding my napkin, feeling something crack inside my chest, like ice breaking in springtime. The sauce was perfect. I had been making it the same way for 20 years. Jonathan ate quietly, avoiding my eyes, pretending he didn't notice the hurt in my expression. "I'm sorry," I heard myself say once again. These words were becoming my only vocabulary, the only sounds I was allowed to make in conversations. "Just eat what you can," Vanessa said with a dramatic sigh. "I'll cook tomorrow so we can have something decent for once." But I knew she wouldn't cook. She never cooked. She would complain about the kitchen being too small or too messy or too inconvenient. And somehow it would become my responsibility again. That was her special skill, making her problems become everyone else's fault. As I reached across the table for the salt shaker, my sleeve brushed against Vanessa's water glass. I watched in slow motion as it tipped over, sending cold water across the table and onto the floor. "Oh no," Vanessa gasped, but her voice carried that fake concern that made my skin crawl. "Look what you've done now, Eleanor. You're so clumsy these days. Clean this mess up before it ruins the hardwood floors." Jonathan jumped up to get paper towels, but Vanessa waved him away. "Let your mother handle it." She made the mess. I got on my hands and knees beside the dining table, soaking up water, while Vanessa and Jonathan continued eating above me. I could feel their eyes watching as I crawled around like a servant, wiping up every drop from the floor. When I finally rose from the polished hardwood floor, clutching the damp towels that had soaked up the spilled water, something inside me had shifted forever. For 2 years, I had been Eleanor Grant, the silent shadow in my own apartment, humiliated and diminished by the young woman who treated me like I was nothing. But on that night, after crawling at their feet, I decided enough was enough. I did not sleep much. Instead, I lay awake in Jonathan's old room, listening to the faint hum of city traffic far below the high-rise windows, replaying every insult, every dismissal, every time Vanessa Cole had looked at me with that smirk of superiority. My heart still pounded with a mix of shame and fury, but also with something new resolve. At dawn, I slipped out of bed and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. There it was, my leather notebook, the quiet record of a life they thought no longer existed. Inside were bank accounts, rental contracts, tax statements, and the neat signature of my property manager, Rick Delgado. Vanessa had believed I was useless, but she had been earning her salary inside a cosmetic dental clinic that survived only because I allowed it to occupy space in a building I owned. That irony had burned me for weeks, but now it would become my weapon. I made coffee and dialed Rick. He answered quickly, his voice warm and reliable, a voice that had seen me through decades of business decisions. "Mrs. Grant," he said cheerfully, "I was just about to call you about next quarter's reports." "Rick," I replied, steady and calm, "I need you to do something for me today. The clinic on the 23rd floor, Sunny Smile Aesthetics. Their lease is due for renewal next month. Do not renew it. Send notice immediately." There was a pause. Rick knew better than to argue, but his curiosity slipped through. "That's Vanessa Cole's office, isn't it?" "Yes," I said, "and I want them gone. 30 days notice. No exceptions." Rick hesitated only a moment. "Understood. I'll take care of it personally." After I hung up, I walked to the window. The sun was rising over the skyline, gilding the glass towers in light. It looked almost like victory already. By mid-morning, I was dressed in my navy suit pearls at my ears, my hair pulled back with precision. For months I had worn the costume of weakness, old sweaters, worn slippers, eyes lowered to the floor. Now I wore the armor of who I truly was. Eleanor Grant, businesswoman, owner of properties worth millions, survivor of struggles that would have crushed most. I drove downtown, parked in my private space marked EG, and walked into the marble lobby of the tower I had built 8 years earlier. The receptionist looked startled when I signed the visitor log, not as a tenant, but as the owner. The elevator doors opened on the 23rd floor. Through the glass panels, I saw Vanessa at the reception desk, tapping on her computer, laughing with a coworker. Her face was radiant, confident, sure of her place in the world. I pushed open the door. "Good morning," Vanessa chirped automatically without glancing up. "How can I help you today?" Then she saw me. For a moment her face went pale, then flushed crimson. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. "I'm here to see Dr. Peterson," I said evenly. "It's about the lease." The coworker looked confused. Vanessa stammered, You can't." Before she could finish, Dr. Peterson himself appeared, smiling warmly until he noticed the tension. "Mrs. Grant." "What an honor to see you in person." "Always a pleasure, Doctor," I said. "Unfortunately, I must inform you that the lease will not be renewed. You'll need to relocate within 30 days. The doctor's expression crumpled into shock. "But we've always paid on time. Is there a problem?" I turned my gaze deliberately to Vanessa. "Yes, a personal problem. I cannot continue to support a business that employs someone who has made my own home unbearable." Vanessa gasped, clutching the edge of her desk. You can't mean this." "I do," I answered. Voice firm but calm. "Some actions have consequences." The office had gone silent. Every staff member was watching their mouths open. Jonathan's wife, the young woman who had strutted with arrogance, was suddenly revealed as the cause of their eviction. That was the moment, the shift, the sudden victory. I could almost hear the audience in my mind, the hundreds of neighbors and friends who had watched me shuffle around in slippers, believing the story Vanessa had spun, that I was frail, confused, fading into irrelevance. Now the truth gleamed like sunlight on glass. I was not weak. I was not finished. I was stronger than ever. But I wanted one more element, something that would carve the lesson deeper. So before I left, I pulled a folded paper from my purse, a letter prepared by Rick. "This," I said, laying it on the counter, "is an offer from a new tenant waiting to take this space. They will bring in a pediatric dental clinic to serve children in this neighborhood, a service that will actually help families, not just pad the pockets of those who mistake cruelty for strength." Vanessa's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper, saw the official letterhead, and realized the decision was final. Not only was she losing her job, she was being replaced by something better, something kinder. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. When I walked back to the elevator, my heels clicked against the polished stone like a drumbeat of triumph. My chest lifted. My steps were steady. My heart was strong. For the first time in years, I felt fully myself. And yet, as the elevator descended, I thought of Jonathan. How would he react? Would he defend Vanessa as always, or would he finally see the truth? The thought was bittersweet because my victory might break my son's illusions. But sometimes illusions must be broken if truth is ever to take root. That evening, as I set a simple dinner on the table, Jonathan called. His voice was tight, almost frantic. "Mom, what did you do? Vanessa says you humiliated her at work, that you're destroying her career. She says you own the building." "That can't be true." "It is true," I replied softly. "I own more than one building, Jonathan. More than you know." There was a stunned silence. Then he whispered, "But why didn't you tell us?" Because I said, steady as the city lights flickered on outside the window, "I needed to know who you really were when you thought I was powerless." He had no answer. The shock waves were only beginning, but I was ready for them. For the first time in years, I was not afraid of the storm. I want to pause here, dear friends, and ask you something simple. If you had been in my place quietly holding the power while being humiliated every day, would you have stayed silent to test the truth? Or would you have revealed your strength sooner? Press 0 for stay silent or 1 for reveal the truth. I cannot wait to see what you decide. Jonathan came home that evening with eyes dark and restless. The city lights behind him cast long shadows through the glass walls of our apartment. He dropped his briefcase onto the counter, staring at me as if I were a stranger. "Mom," he said, his voice low but sharp, "tell me it isn't true. Tell me you don't own that building. Tell me you didn't humiliate Vanessa in front of her coworkers." I placed the teapot on the table, steam curling like unanswered prayers. "It's true," I said simply. The silence that followed was heavy like the hush before a storm. Why his voice cracked? Why would you do something so cruel? I looked at him, my only son, the boy I had raised after his father died, the man I thought would carry his father's decency forward. "Jonathan, I wasn't cruel. I was honest. What's cruel is letting someone strip away your dignity day after day until you feel like a ghost in your own home." His eyes narrowed. "You could have just asked her to change. You could have come to me." I wanted to laugh, but the sound would have been too bitter. I did Jonathan. With my silence, with my tears. With every apology, I whispered when she mocked me. "You looked away every time. You laughed nervously and told her I was getting clumsy." Do you remember that he swallowed hard but said nothing? For years I had carried the pain alone, but now the words tumbled out sharp and unstoppable. Do you know what it feels like to be treated like a burden in the home you paid for, in the apartment you designed in the kitchen, where you taught your children to bake cookies? Do you know what it feels like to clean up spills on your knees while your own son pretends not to notice? That is cruelty, Jonathan. Not what I did today. His face twisted, torn between shame and anger. "You should have trusted me," he muttered. "I did," I whispered, my voice breaking. And that's what hurts the most. The pain cut deeper, because it was true. I had trusted him, and he had failed me. That betrayal burned hotter than all of Vanessa's insults combined. For the first time, Jonathan saw me not as a fragile mother, but as someone holding a mirror to his failures. He flinched, but still he tried to defend her. "She lost her job because of you. She's devastated. She lost her job because of herself." I snapped the fury I had swallowed for 2 years, finally seeping through. Actions have consequences. She treated me like dirt, and now she knows what it feels like when the ground shifts beneath her feet. The room pulsed with tension. Even the hum of the refrigerator seemed to fade. My chest tightened with grief. I hated fighting with my son, but the truth had to be said. And then, as if fate wanted to carve the wound even deeper, my phone rang. The caller ID read Jennifer. My daughter's voice came through full of worry. "Mom, Jonathan just called me. He says you've been hiding a fortune, letting them think you were poor. Why didn't you tell us?" Tears welled in my eyes. "Because, sweetheart, I needed to know who you all were when you thought I had nothing. Sometimes you only see people's true faces when they believe you're powerless." The silence on the other end was long and heavy. Finally, Jennifer whispered, "That's heartbreaking, Mom. But I understand." I ended the call, but the ache stayed with me. That night, I lay awake in my room, staring at the skyline. The glow of the city mocked me with its brightness. Victory had tasted sweet in the clinic that morning, but here, in the stillness of my home, it felt hollow, because my triumph had cost me the trust of my son. The pain was almost unbearable, like a wound that refused to close. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms, as if holding on to my anger could keep me from drowning in sorrow. It reminded me of something I had once read in a collection of Reddit revenge stories, how victories often came with unexpected grief, how justice could taste both sharp and bitter. Tonight I understood that truth with every fiber of my being. The new element came the next day. Rick called to tell me that word of the eviction had spread quickly. One of the city's newspapers wanted to interview me for a feature about senior landlords standing up against tenant abuse. "Eleanor, this could make waves," Rick said. "Your story could give courage to people who feel voiceless." For a moment I hesitated. I had always been private. But then I thought of the women my age who were silently suffering, humiliated in their own homes, afraid to speak up. Maybe my pain could serve a purpose beyond myself. "Set it up," I told him. The thought of exposing my family drama to the world filled me with dread. But it also gave me strength. Sometimes light must shine into the darkest corners, no matter the discomfort. When Jonathan came home that evening, I told him about the interview. His reaction was explosive. "Are you insane? You'll ruin our reputation. Everyone will know our business." "Our business," I shot back. "This isn't about you, Jonathan. This is about dignity, about respect, about showing others they are not alone." He slammed his hand on the counter. "You're destroying everything." "No," I said softly, though my hands trembled. "I'm saving myself, and maybe, just maybe, I'll save someone else too." The pain of that confrontation carved itself into my memory. My son's eyes filled with anger, but beneath it, I saw something else: fear. Fear that the truth about him, about his silence, would also come to light. That realization stung more than anything. My victory had not only unmasked Vanessa, it had unmasked Jonathan too. And facing that truth was like holding a shard of glass to my own heart. Later, when I sat alone on the balcony, the city sprawling beneath me, I thought again about those Reddit revenge stories I had once scrolled through in quiet hours. Stories of people finding strength after years of humiliation. I used to think they were exaggerated, too dramatic. Now I knew they were real. I was living one. Friends, I know this part of my journey is heavy. It carries the weight of betrayal and the ache of silence too long endured. But it's important. Because sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who should have stood beside us. And admitting that pain is the first step toward healing. If you feel the ache of these words, if you've ever been disappointed by someone you love, tap the like button. It helps this story reach more people who may need it. Before I close this chapter, let me ask you if you were in my place. Would you forgive Jonathan quickly because he is your son? Or would you hold him accountable for his silence? Press 0 for forgive quickly, or 1 for hold accountable. The morning after Jonathan's fury still echoed in my ears, I brewed coffee stronger than usual. The bitterness matched the taste in my mouth. The city outside was waking, but inside my apartment, silence pressed heavy against the walls. For years I had lived quietly, apologetically, bowing to keep peace. But something inside me had changed forever. The night before, Jonathan had slammed his hand on the counter, furious about the interview I agreed to give. He wanted silence. He wanted the truth buried. But I had decided differently. I would no longer live muted in my own life. I sat at the table, notebook open, and wrote out what needed to be done. Not a list of chores, not groceries or errands, but declarations: reclaim my home, reclaim my voice, reclaim my dignity. The first step was the apartment itself. Vanessa had shifted furniture, hidden my family pictures, replaced warm colors with cold glass decor that made me feel like a guest in my own home. That morning, I began to move everything back. My late husband's armchair returned to the window. The quilt my mother had made went back on the sofa. I unpacked photo frames that had been tucked into storage and placed them proudly along the hallway. As I worked, tears streamed down my cheeks, not from sadness this time, but from relief. Every picture, every familiar piece of furniture was a piece of myself coming home. The space no longer belonged to Vanessa's ambitions. It belonged to me. When Jonathan walked in that evening, his face darkened. "What are you doing? I'm putting my life back where it belongs," I answered. "You should have asked us." He snapped. "No, Jonathan," I said firmly, my voice steady as steel. "You should have asked me before you let her take it away." His mouth opened, then closed again. He had no answer. The next step was financial. For 2 years, I had let them believe I was poor. That illusion had been shattered, but I wasn't going to let the narrative slip back into their control. I contacted Rick Delgado, my property manager, and asked him to prepare a full portfolio summary. When Jonathan came to me with his endless proposals about partnerships and joint ventures, I handed him the folder. This, I said, is my life's work. Mine, not yours, not Vanessa's. I built this piece by piece, managing tenants, solving problems, investing carefully. You thought I was incapable. Now you see the truth, but that doesn't make you my partner. Respect is not a business transaction. It's a daily practice. He looked through the numbers, stunned by the value, but I refused to let the money distract from the point. Jonathan, what I need from you isn't a business deal. It's respect, something far more valuable than dollars. The new element came unexpectedly. A neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, who had overheard many of Vanessa's cruel words in the hallway, knocked on my door. She carried a plate of cookies and a nervous smile. "I heard about what happened at the clinic," she said softly. "And I want you to know, Eleanor, I always admired your patience. But I also wondered how long you would endure. I'm glad you stood up for yourself." Her words warmed me more than the coffee ever could. Later that week, she invited me to join a community group for women in our building. Widows, grandmothers, retired professionals who met weekly to share experiences. That group became a lifeline. As I sat among them telling my story, I realized I wasn't alone. So many had endured disrespect in silence, believing they had no choice. Sharing my journey reminded me of something I once saw online in Reddit: family tales, ordinary mothers and grandmothers standing up, setting boundaries, reclaiming their voice. My story now belonged to that same lineage. Jonathan resented the changes. At dinner one night, he tried again. "Mom, this is tearing us apart. Can't you just let things go? You don't need to prove anything." I set my fork down. My hands didn't tremble. Jonathan. I let things go for 2 years. I bent until I almost broke. But now I am done bending. From here on, this house is governed by respect. If you and Vanessa can't give it, you won't live here. His face reddened, his fists clenched, but he said nothing. For the first time, the power had shifted completely. That night, I walked onto the balcony, the skyline glittering below. I breathed in the cool night air, knowing that victory wasn't loud, it was steady, rooted, unshakable. The interview was published 2 weeks later. The headline read, "Landlord Stands Tall, Eleanor Grant's Story of Dignity." It told not just about the clinic eviction, but about the silent battle fought in my own home. Letters began arriving, emails too, from strangers who thanked me for speaking out. Women wrote about their own struggles, some eerily similar to mine. They called my story inspiring, a reminder that it is never too late to demand respect. One message struck me most. "I've been living with my daughter and her husband," a woman wrote. "They treat me like a burden. After reading your story, I told them I would no longer accept it. Thank you." Reading her words, I realized my pain had been transformed into something powerful. My private battle had become a public beacon. That sense of purpose carried me through the lingering conflict with Jonathan. But the greatest shift was internal. I no longer felt the need to apologize for existing. I no longer whispered, "I'm sorry," for every mistake. Instead, I spoke clearly, confidently, without lowering my eyes. And the strangest thing happened: people listened. Even Jonathan, who bristled and resisted, began to hesitate before dismissing me. The balance had changed. I had claimed my place again. Looking back, it reminded me once more of those Reddit family tales I had read in lonely nights, stories of people who seemed powerless only to rise stronger than anyone expected. Now I wasn't just reading one, I was living one. Friends, I know this part may sound fierce, even harsh, but sometimes fierceness is necessary. Sometimes silence must be broken with a voice that refuses to bend. And if my story speaks to you, if it resonates with your own experiences, take a moment to press the like button. It helps these stories reach others who may need courage tonight. Before we move on, I want to ask you something simple. Does this voice draw you in? If not, press 0. If it does, press 1. The night after the article was published, the apartment felt heavier than ever. Jonathan and Vanessa barely spoke to me. Their whispers carried through the thin walls, tense and bitter. Suitcases appeared in the hallway by Friday morning, and I knew the time had come. Jonathan stood in the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his jaw tight. Vanessa sat on the sofa, her eyes swollen from crying, but her lips still pressed in defiance. Mom Jonathan began quietly, "We've decided to move out, to stay with my brother for now." I nodded. I had known this moment was coming, but the reality of it carved a hollow place in my chest. I wanted to cry to beg him to stay, to remind him of the nights I sat up with him as a child when he was sick of the sacrifices I made so he could become the man he was. But I stayed silent. Pride held me upright. "Take care of yourselves," I said softly. "This home will always be mine. What you make of your lives now is up to you." Helping them carry their bags down to the car was surreal. Each thud of luggage on the stairs felt like another layer of grief breaking away. When the car door slammed shut and they drove off, I stood at the curb for a long moment staring at the empty street. Relief washed over me finally. My home was mine again. But woven into that relief was a deep, bitter loneliness. I had won, yes, but the cost was high. I walked back into the apartment. For the first time in months, it was silent. No television blaring, no footsteps pacing behind me, no cutting remarks floating down the hallway. Only quiet. Quiet, I realized, can feel both like freedom and like exile. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the balcony overlooking the city skyline. The lights sparkled like stars, but they offered little comfort. I was free, yes, but I was also alone. I thought about Jonathan, the little boy who once clung to my skirt on his first day of school. I thought about Vanessa, the young woman who could have been like a daughter, but chose to be my tormentor instead. The bitterness cut deep. And yet beneath the ache there was something else, pride. Pride that I had not broken. Pride that I had stood tall when everything in me wanted to collapse. The new element came the following week. A letter arrived in the mail addressed in handwriting I did not recognize. Inside was a note from a tenant in one of my buildings. "Mrs. Grant," it read. "I read about your story in the paper. I want you to know that because of you, I found the courage to leave a toxic situation in my own home. Thank you for showing that it's never too late to demand respect." I sat with that letter in my hands for a long time. It was more than just words on a page. It was proof that my suffering had not been meaningless. My private humiliation had become a public story that gave strength to others. It didn't erase the loneliness, but it gave the pain purpose. Jonathan called a few days later. His voice was tight, cautious. "Mom, I'm sorry for how things ended. I just don't understand why you let it go on so long before saying anything. Because I replied I wanted to see who you were when you thought I had nothing. And I did see. That truth hurt more than anything Vanessa ever said to me." The silence on the line was deafening. I heard him breathe in, shaky and uneven. Are you saying you can't forgive me?" "I'm saying forgiveness takes time, Jonathan. Trust takes time. And I need to see change, not just hear promises." He swallowed audibly. "I understand." The call ended, leaving me with an ache that lingered well into the night. In the days that followed, I reclaimed my space, piece by piece. I hired painters to cover the walls with colors I loved. I asked contractors to repair the hardwood floors my late husband had once polished by hand. I took long walks through the city, rediscovering places I had avoided while living under Vanessa's sharp gaze. Each step forward felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. And yet every evening when I returned to the apartment, the silence greeted me like a reminder of what I had lost. It was a strange balance, freedom laced with sorrow, independence, woven with solitude. One night, as I sat on the balcony again, I realized that what I was experiencing was the very definition of bittersweet, the sweetness of freedom, the bitterness of broken ties. I thought about other women my age scattered across this vast country who might be facing the same struggles, women whose children no longer respected them, whose homes no longer felt like their own. I wanted them to know that liberation often comes with loneliness, but that loneliness is survivable. In that moment, I whispered aloud, "You are stronger than you think." Even when freedom feels like loss, it is still freedom. The words hung in the cool night air, and I felt a strange comfort. The next morning, I joined the community group Mrs. Peterson had invited me to. For the first time, I spoke openly about Jonathan moving out. The women listened, nodded, some even wept. They understood. They had lived versions of my story in their own ways. One woman, a retired teacher, leaned across the table and said, "Eleanor, sometimes the most courageous thing a mother can do is let her children go when they no longer bring peace to her home." Her words stayed with me. They softened the bitterness and helped me see my solitude not as abandonment, but as space for growth, healing, and maybe even reconciliation in the future. That night, I lit a single candle in the dining room. I ate dinner alone, but not in defeat. I ate with dignity. Every bite tasted of freedom, even if it carried the seasoning of sorrow. And as I washed the dishes afterward, I realized something vital. I was no longer the woman who whispered, "I'm sorry for everything." I was Eleanor Grant, and I had reclaimed not just my home, but my sense of self. Friends, I know this part of my story is heavy. Liberation often is. It comes wrapped in both victory and grief, but it is worth it, because no one should live diminished not even for the comfort of family. If you've ever felt that strange mix of pride and loneliness after standing up for yourself, then you know what I mean. The apartment was quiet after Jonathan and Vanessa left, but the silence no longer pressed against me like exile. It began to feel different, like open air after being trapped underground. A sense of possibility stirred inside me, soft at first, then stronger each day. In part 4, I told you how I sat alone at dinner with one candle, reminding myself that solitude could be strength. That night marked the turning point. From then on, I no longer saw myself as abandoned. I saw myself as reborn. The first sign of rebirth was the morning sun streaming through uncovered windows. I had pulled the curtains wide open the night before, and now golden light spilled across the hardwood floors freshly polished by the contractors I had hired. The air smelled faintly of lemon and wood stain, clean and alive. I brewed coffee and took it to the balcony. Below the city was stirring buses, rumbling bicycles, weaving between cars, people rushing toward offices. For years I had watched this view with a heavy heart. Now for the first time in a long while I felt eager to be part of it again. I put on my navy suit not to confront anyone this time, but to remind myself that I was still Eleanor Grant, a woman capable of shaping her own world. The new element came in the form of a phone call from Rick Delgado, my property manager and longtime ally. "Eleanor," he said, excitement in his voice, "there's a small office building on Maple Avenue going up for sale. The owner is retiring, wants to close quickly. It could be a perfect addition to your portfolio." Maple Avenue. I knew that street. It was lined with little cafes and family-owned shops, a vibrant part of the city I had always loved. "Show me the numbers," I told him. 2 days later, I walked through the building with Rick. It wasn't glamorous, peeling paint on the walls, faded carpet, buzzing fluorescent lights, but I saw potential. I imagined bright spaces filled with therapists, tutors, small business owners. I imagined community. Standing in one of the empty offices, I felt a surge of energy that almost startled me. After years of pretending to be powerless here, I was planning for growth. Not just maintaining what I had, but expanding. "Yes," I told Rick firmly. "Let's do it." He smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The weeks that followed were busy but joyful. I oversaw renovations, met potential tenants, and found myself buzzing with ideas. Each decision reminded me that my mind was still sharp, my instincts still strong. At the same time, I made changes at home. I filled the apartment with plants, their green leaves soaking up the light. I reopened my home office and placed my desk by the window where I could see the skyline as I worked. I played music again, soft jazz in the mornings, classical in the evenings. The apartment began to reflect me, not Vanessa's cold preferences, and with every change, my spirit brightened. One Sunday morning, as I arranged flowers on the dining table, there was a knock at the door. It was Jennifer, my daughter. She had flown in from Seattle after hearing about everything. Her eyes widened when she stepped inside. "Mom, it's beautiful. It feels like you again." I hugged her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "It is me again," I said with a smile. We spent the afternoon cooking together, laughing like we hadn't in years. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, she told me how proud she was. "You showed us all that strength doesn't fade with age. It grows." Her words filled me with a joy so radiant, it felt like light shining straight into my soul. That evening, after Jennifer left, I sat on the balcony once more. But now, instead of loneliness, I felt peace. The skyline glowed like a tapestry of possibilities. My life, once darkened by humiliation and silence, now gleamed with renewal. For the first time, I thought about travel. Maybe Europe in the spring. Maybe visiting old friends I had lost touch with while hiding in my own home. The world no longer felt closed to me. It felt wide open. The Maple Avenue building officially became mine in early autumn. The day the papers were signed, I walked through the front doors and felt as though I had walked into a new chapter of my life. Tenants soon filled the spaces, a counseling center, a language school, a bakery on the ground floor. One afternoon, as I tasted pastries from the new bakery tenant, I realized I was not just rebuilding my business. I was building a legacy, a place where others could thrive. The laughter of customers, the smell of fresh bread, the sight of children leaving their tutoring sessions, it was all life, vibrant and new. The pride was not arrogant. It was the quiet, steady pride of someone who had been buried but chose to rise again. And with that pride came peace. Even Jonathan, though still distant, began to soften. He called one evening, his voice subdued. "Mom, I heard about the new building. Congratulations. I'm glad you're doing well." It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a step. And for the first time, I felt patient. I no longer needed his approval to feel whole. I had found my own light. As I share this part of my story with you, friends, I want you to feel the energy of renewal, too. Maybe you've been through years of silence or neglect. Maybe you've felt invisible in your own home. But hear me when I say rebirth is possible. The spark you think has gone out can be lit again, brighter than ever. I have lived it. And if I can, you can too. That night, I closed my eyes in a home that finally felt alive again. Plants breathed around me. Music lingered in the air. The city hummed with promise outside my window. I drifted to sleep, not with sorrow, but with a smile. My life was no longer about survival. It was about living fully, brightly, joyfully. And that, my friends, is what true peace feels like. The seasons turned, and with them, so did my life. The Maple Avenue building thrived with new tenants, the bakery scent spilling onto the street, the counseling center buzzing with clients, the tutoring center echoing with children's laughter. Every time I walked through its doors, I felt not only pride but serenity. I had built something lasting, something that served more than myself. In part 5, I told you how Jennifer returned, how we laughed and cooked together, how she reminded me that strength grows with age. That visit marked the moment when loneliness no longer defined me. From then on, I carried not sorrow but peace. Peace, however, is not the absence of memory. At night, when the city lights shimmered outside my window, I still thought of Jonathan. The ache of betrayal lingered, but it no longer consumed me. Instead, I saw it with clarity as part of the story that shaped me. Pain had been my teacher, but wisdom, was my reward. When he called again months later, his tone was different, softer, humble. "Mom," he said, "Vanessa and we separated. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about respect, about the way I failed you." My heart swelled with both grief and tenderness. "Jonathan," I replied, "respect is not complicated. It is the air we breathe in relationships. Without it, nothing survives. But I'm glad you finally see it." There was silence, then a quiet, "I want to do better." I didn't rush to forgive, but I allowed the door to open. Forgiveness, I had learned, is not forgetting. It is choosing to move forward without carrying the weight of bitterness. I began speaking at community groups, sometimes to small gatherings in church halls, sometimes to larger events hosted by women's organizations. They wanted to hear the story of a mother who had been underestimated, humiliated, then rose with quiet strength. Each time I spoke, I saw eyes glisten, heads nod, hands squeeze in recognition. One evening, after sharing my journey, a woman in her 70s approached me. She pressed my hands in hers and whispered, "You gave me permission to stop apologizing for existing." Tears rolled down her cheeks. That was when I realized the true gift of survival turning personal pain into collective wisdom. The new element came when the local newspaper that had once interviewed me reached out again. This time they weren't interested in scandal or eviction notices. They wanted me to write a column, a monthly reflection on aging dignity and resilience. At first I hesitated. I had never thought of myself as a writer. But then I remembered the countless nights I had written in my leather notebook documenting finances, plans, even secret thoughts. My words had carried me through dark times. Perhaps now they could guide others. So I said yes. My first column was titled, "Respect is Not Earned. By Convenience It is Given by Humanity." The responses poured in, letters from men and women who saw themselves in my words, who drew courage from them, who finally felt less alone. Through it all, I felt a growing calm. No longer was I fighting daily battles inside my own home. No longer was I pretending to be less than I was. I had reclaimed my space, my voice, my identity, and in doing so, I discovered something priceless tranquility that could not be shaken. The pride I carried was not boastful. It was quiet, steady, like a lighthouse standing firm against crashing waves. Looking back, I see the arc of my story clearly. From humiliation at the dining table to revelation at the clinic to confrontation with my son to the lonely nights of bittersweet freedom and finally to this moment of serenity. The lesson, dear friends, is simple but profound. Your worth is not defined by how others treat you. Your dignity is not theirs to give or take. It belongs to you always. We cannot control how others behave. We cannot force love or respect. But we can control how we respond. We can choose not to shrink. We can choose to stand tall even if it means standing alone. And when we do, life has a way of rewarding us with peace we never thought possible. Sometimes I sit on my balcony at sunset watching the sky bleed into gold and crimson. I sip tea, the city humming beneath me, and I think of all the women listening now. Women who may be silently enduring disrespect in their own homes. Women who wonder if it's too late to change. It is never too late. Not at 40, not at 70, not at 90. Liberation has no expiration date. If you carry one thing from my story, let it be this. You deserve respect not because you are perfect, but because you are human. Now, as we close this chapter together, I want to pause and thank you from the deepest place in my heart. Thank you for walking with me through the darkest valleys and the brightest dawns. Thank you for listening, for understanding, for letting my story touch your lives. If my journey has reminded you of your own strength, then every moment of pain was worth it. I invite you now to be part of this community where stories like mine live and breathe. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a new story of courage and dignity. Leave a comment to share your own experiences. We learn and heal together. And if this story resonated with you, watch the videos I've left at the end. They carry messages that may comfort and inspire you further. Most of all, remember this: you are stronger than you know, more valuable than you realize, and worthy of respect that can never be diminished. This is Auntie May 365 Voice, and I'll see you in the next video.